Comedy is simply a funny way of being serious. Nobody knows that better than the guest I'm about to have on this show. Peter Gaulke, a former stand-up comic turned television and feature film writer, has spent the last several decades releasing high-budget feature films starring the likes of Will Ferrell, Salma Hayek, Alec Baldwin, Jonah Hill, and the list goes on and on. Pete was a mentor of mine when I spent the latter years in Los Angeles trying to pursue a career as a comedy writer myself. I had read Judd Apatow's book, Sick in the Head, which was a story about kind of going out there and talking to comics. And so, inspired by this, I went ahead and I connected with comics like Pete. Pete has been someone who I've relied on over the years for script feedback and revisions and just general life advice. So I'm super happy to have him on for this podcast, and I want to talk to him about the future of comedy as he sees it, how it's evolved over the years from being late night shows to the more modern era of Netflix specials and streaming exclusives. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you my good friend, Peter Gaulke. Pete, thanks so much for taking the time to come on this thing and talk some comedy. It's been
Well, it's better, glasses or not glasses? What do you think? I mean, as you get older, these things are important.
Right. Well, is it important for you to see?
Yeah.
That's the real question.
I can't see with or without glasses, so it doesn't matter.
It's just like a look. I see.
Yeah, these aren't even real glasses.
Yeah, well, they're nice. They look designer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very
cool. Thanks. Well, yeah, Pete. So I was just going through my notes here, going back on the old IMDb. It looks like so. I remember when we first met. Kind of my introduction to you was my friend had taken me aside one time, and he's like, "You're trying to be a comedy writer. There's this movie you got to watch. It's called Strange Wilderness, and it's like smart, dumb comedy, and it's just there aren't a lot of movies like it, and I think you'd really like it." And so we put it on that night. He had it on DVD, and I watched the whole thing, and there were parts where I was like crying. I just couldn't contain myself because it was like. And I've talked to other people about this. That movie was kind of ahead of its time in terms of the absurdist sort of comedy style, where it was almost very self-aware that it was a film, and so it was just funny things happening. And it almost reminded me of like The Jerk, Steve Martin, like that kind of like self-aware sort of comedy. And more recently, you have characters like Eric Andre, who just, they bring a guest on a late night show, and then the desk just explodes, and just things just happen that are crazy, but it's written in such a way that it's very well timed, and it pays off to somebody like me. I don't know if maybe an older audience feels differently about those kind of films. I feel like I have that kind of generational gap with my dad. He's much more used to conventional, like slapstick kind of humor. But yeah, so you were a gymnast before any of the comedy stuff. What brought you into thinking that, hey, maybe I could take this in front of a crowd, or early comedic inklings?
First about that dumb, smart comedy. It really is. It's not everybody sort of gets it. That's my favorite kind of comedy. It's the dumb stuff that is actually really smart, and a lot of people would just look at it and say, no, it's just dumb.
Right.
Friends of mine, people I know, family members,
100%.
That's just dumb. It's juvenile and dumb, but they just don't really understand the offbeat quirkiness of it that you can only do with a smarter comedy. And it's not just a pie in the face,
Right.
And so, so that's always been a struggle, trying to do something like that is, that that isn't just looked down on by people and critics, you know. And that's just what you're going to do, knowing that you go into it anyway and you do it, knowing that a huge part of the population is just going to think it's stupid. And actually critics will write about movies like that. They'll say, this is the worst movie of the year, but I couldn't help laughing all the way through it. And you just go, well, what are you talking about? That's what I was setting out to do, is to make people laugh, not make the. I'm not trying to create a dramatic, great literature or anything. It's just to make people laugh. And I think critics forget that when they just tear these movies apart, is if it makes you laugh, it's achieved its goal, you know?
What are you more concerned with as a writer, like appealing to sort of the smaller audience that you know is just going to get it? Or are you trying to get the widest positive reaction possible?
You know, I don't really have any option. All I can do is what I think is funny. It's not like, I know that if I try to do something outside of my wheelhouse, sort of, of course I'm doing that now, but it's not comedy that I'm doing, you know?
Yeah.
But comedically, I just have a specific sense of humor. And when I was at Saturday Night Live, I wrote sketches that fit my sense of humor. And it would have taken me a while to sort of clue into exactly how to write a Saturday Night Live sketch, but I didn't stay there long enough. I went to do other stuff. But yeah, it's hard to, what you want to do is do what you do and have it click with a really large audience. And then, so what you do is you try to maybe tweak things a little bit here and there, or avoid doing things that are just, that only a couple of people will laugh at, and try to just, do something a little more mainstream, which is kind of what I did with this 12 Days of Christmas that I wrote with Kevin Heffernan. It was written as a very, very user-friendly comedy, but really funny and really good. And so it's trying to make something just great. And so that's probably the first script I've done where I've actually written where I've done that. And it took me this long to get there, to where I just said, okay, I'm just going to write a really funny movie that sort of covers all the bases, that you want in a big commercial, great comedy that's actually kind of has some quirkiness to it, but not too much. And it's very clever, it's very clever in the way it's structured and put together. So that's about, if it gets made, which, hopefully it'll be, maybe they're doing a little rewrite on it with the director, actually changes that he wanted to make, but I didn't want to make. So they hired another guy to come in to do what I didn't want to do. And so, but I don't think they can hurt it. It's just a really good concept. So if that happens, then that'll probably be maybe the first comedy that I've written that would be more of a, other than Ice Age, which would be more of a more crowd pleasing sort of, I think a pretty solid movie,
Yeah, definitely. Well, going back to kind of the early days, so, I mean, for those who haven't really followed comedy that closely, there was like a stand-up boom, safe to say, like in the 80s and 90s, where all of these comedians were coming out of the woodwork, some from like the Upright Citizens Brigade that landed roles on SNL. Describe sort of that early scene, because you were a part of that, right at the beginning.
Well, there were the big comics like Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld, and George Carlin, guys like that. There weren't a lot of comics back in like the late 60s, early like 70s, through the 70s.
Yeah.
And so then comedy got really hot. Everybody, like when I started doing comedy, there were really no comedy clubs. There were just a few comedy clubs around the country. So me and my friends, who all started comedy around the same time, we were just in it really. I don't even know why we were in it, because there was no venue for it,
Right.
It was just the Comedy Store or the Improv, and that was it. And So, and then there were a couple little one-nighters like where they'd have folk night and stuff and talent nights. And so, but then comedy clubs did start to open, and we were sort of in on the boom in the beginning. But something I always tell people about when it comes to comedy in the '80s, if you look back at what we don't have now, we have a lot of great comics. I mean, there's so many comics all over Netflix and stuff. There's some really funny comics. But what you don't have are like the Geek Acts, which is what I would call like acts like Stephen Wright, Emo Phillips. Stephen Wright's been sort of used so many times by other comics as that's a little watered down now. But
how would you describe a geek act?
It's kind of like, let's say, Andy Kaufman, Steve Martin, somebody that is just doing like a character or an offbeat weird thing,
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of that going on right now, I don't see a lot of like character, odd, weird acts. There might be a couple, but you don't see a lot of them. Back then, it's like 1 out of 3 comics were just odd and weird,
Yeah, I think even like Adam Sandler's early stuff, he was almost kind of this character,
Yeah, Adams was really weird, it was really offbeat, and there were so many, there were just there were a lot of odd act, Judy Tenuta, but there were tons of them, and that's something, and a lot of those acts were more like middle acts because they couldn't sustain a character like that for an hour,
Yeah.
And I was able to do that with what I did, and I was a geek act, I did a lot of odd, weird things, with the audience, but I was able to keep it going for an hour, so I was able to headline as a weird act,
Yeah.
And,
so why would you say that that's changed? Like, why do you think comics today aren't really gravitating toward playing a character as much?
I don't know. I think it's just because there was when the alternative comedy scene hit, like in the '90s, the late '90s, I think, is the alternative comedy scene. It was called the alternative comedy scene, but to me, it was way less alternative than what had been going on. It's just that it wasn't the performance. It was more like you'd go up and you'd talk about what's going on with you on a daily basis in the industry, not being able to get work,
Yeah.
And now it's become most comics that I look at on there are exceptions, but most comics that I see now sort of follow that pattern of just almost like Jerry Seinfeld, They're very, very just observational jokes about normal everyday life, which is great, But I think there's
more
maybe
thematic, I guess.
A little too much of that, though. Maybe I wish there was more variety out there,
Right.
And maybe I'm wrong. It could be I'm just old and a curmudgeon, and I'm just complaining about the good old days. But
yeah, well, I do get your point, though. I mean, especially when it comes to these Netflix specials going up every month, I do notice that kind of recurring theme of having a philosophical underpinning or some kind of like life observation. Bill Burr, of course, would be a good example of this. Or
and he's great. I mean, I have to say, some of the best ones too are the guys that have been around since
Dave
the
Chappelle
90s.
too.
Yeah, like from the '90s or something. Like what's his name? The guy, what's his name? Me Too'd. He was. I can't think of, but Bill Burr. He wasn't Me Too'd.
There's a few of them though.
Yeah, but the guys who were like who've been at it for quite a while, and they've more recently, like in the last 10 years, have become really big, and they're great, and so, but they have their own personalities on stage, but it's not a really wildly exaggerated persona,
Yeah. Well, so with stand-up, I mean, I've known, comedians who, I'm not going to name any, but there are people who I've seen in the stand-up world that really kill it. But when it comes to writing scenes on paper, maybe it's the casting, maybe it's, the way that producers interfere with it. I just don't find them as funny on paper. And there's other people who are really great writers, but just can't perform that well in front of an audience. Mm-hmm. So what would you say makes, like, what does one require in order to be able to do both? Like, what does a good comic need to not only write material that's funny for other people, but also execute it themselves?
It's almost kind of random. I think, when I was doing stand-up, I was actually doing really well, but I realized that I wasn't going to go any further than I had been. And I was getting at an age where I'd been doing it too long to really have a shot at that,
Yeah.
And I think, and I was really wildly different than anybody else, but it still didn't happen. And it's one of those big questions. You just don't know why it just didn't click in the right way, And I think that that's sort of a natural thing. You have to first be really funny and really good at what you do. And I think a lot of it has to just do with the confidence of knowing who you are, And a lot of comics, like I knew comics who, a couple of them when they first started out, who were, Pat Hannafin is one who was one of the funniest guys I've ever seen when he first started. Like literally the first 6 months he was on stage, he was one of the funniest guys, really creative, inventive, different. But he didn't know what he didn't see it, he wasn't able to look at himself and get it. And then he changed. He wanted to become an MC, a really good MC. So he changed everything he did. All the originality just went left, and he started to try to be the best MC he could be. So a lot of it's sort of just has to be a natural thing when it comes to performing, and for people for you to become really, say, popular doing stand-up. It's almost like a crapshoot in a way, I mean, there's some really talented, funny writers who are also good performers, but whatever it is about their personality on stage or whatever they do, it just doesn't click. And yet I've seen people who they haven't got great material, but there's something about what they do on stage that is easy to plug into something,
Got it.
And so that has that's a big part of it in transcending, say, the comedy club scene and going into like TV or movies or something. It can be something as simple as there's something about what he does. He just keeps it. Whatever he did was simple and just happened to work. It's like what's his name from Home Improvement,
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Boy, we're awful with names.
Yeah.
And he was a good stand-up, but yeah. it was not great. but what he did was his own personality and the way he was perfect for that, And right. So
your first like television gig was Married with Children, I believe, was the first writing gig that you had from stand-up. Was that correct? Or
yeah, that would be the first one I had. I mean, I created videos for a couple of shows, these little comedy variety shows earlier than that, but that was just sort of as a freelancer,
Got it.
And then
so that was your first time writing in like an official capacity for a show.
Yeah. So yeah, and then I'd shoot the videos, and then wait, hold on a second. Sorry. And then I would shoot the videos, and then they'd put them on they had these shows on where they were like almost like Funniest Home Video. Hey, I had a video on this is when they weren't sure what Funniest Home Videos was going to be, So the pilot episode of Funniest Home Videos, I did a video for them, The Mobile Mechanic. And if you can find the pilot episode of Funniest Home Videos, you'll see that video on it. But then right after they did that show, they realized how easy it was to not have anyone not spend any money on original content and just clips. Have people send videos in,
Right.
So they stopped doing that right away. So that would have been potentially a show that I would have written on and done videos for, but But it's the one part of the show that actually they realized they didn't need.
So what was the discovery process like for you going to work at SNL? Was it your classic scenario of like a manager sitting in one of your comedy rooms and coming up after, hey, Pete, we got a spot opening up here. We think you'd be a good fit for this, or how'd it go?
Well, actually, just to get to Saturday Night Live, I never really, I've told you this story before, but I failed English all through school. I couldn't write a sentence. I was awful. I didn't read a book until I was probably 22 years old on the road doing stand-up comedy, and then I had never written anything. So as I'm doing stand-up comedy, I sort of just taught myself how to type so I could type my act out, And then when I shot a video, I had to write out what I was going to do, and I started to format it, looked at formatting, And then I eventually got to a point to where I wrote a sketch. And then, so I really wasn't much of a writer. And then a friend of mine, Fred Wolf, was working at Saturday Night Live. And he said, hey, why don't you write a sketch and send it in, and I'll put it into the table read. And I go, okay. So I wrote this sketch, really the first sketch I ever wrote. And it was called, it was about O.J. Simpson, and it was way, way back in 95 or something.
Yeah.
And it was O.J. Simpson and F. Lee Bailey in search of the killer. And they go to like Club Med looking for them. They go to a nude beach looking for them, And
oh my God.
they ride one of those hot dogs behind a boat, around the island. And they were going to do it, but then they couldn't do it because it was going to cost too much money for all the sets. So they didn't do it. But they hired me on for a 2-week guest stint,
Mm-hmm.
And so I flew out there, and there was a lot of pressure on me because I could barely write, So I go out there and I'm just thinking, God, they're going to find out how horrible I am. And I wrote like 4 sketches while I was out there for the 2 weeks. And one of them, a couple of them were actually did really well, didn't get on the show, but they were really, or maybe one of them did get on the show. I think actually one of them did. It was Home for the Holidays with Will Ferrell.
And so how does that work? So they have a table of writers coming up with the next episode sketch. And how many people are in that room, and how is it kind of decided?
Well, on Monday, the host is there. It's actually pretty amazing. The host is, what they do is almost impossible, to do a live, what is it, an hour and a half?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I should know. And so they,
right.
So Monday, the host shows up and everybody is in a room with Lorne Michaels, all the writers, and we pitch out ideas. A lot of, I would always pitch out the same idea, And so, then the host on Monday night walks around and talks to the writers about, things that they'd like to do or ideas. And then Tuesday, you're supposed to start writing the sketches. But I would always get there early because I was more of an early person. But a lot of people get there at about 3 p.m, and then they write until like 3 a.m, Wednesday morning, And then they take about like maybe 40 sketches that have been written. And Wednesday at about 10 o'clock or so, they all the writers pile into this big room around a table with all the actors, and then a lot of the heads of the different departments, makeup and all that are in there. And then the cast and the host that week, they read all the sketches, sort of acting them out in chairs,
Yeah.
And then Lorne and the head writer or writers and the host go in and they talk to the host for a few minutes, get it, ask him what he likes and what he doesn't like. And then they just basically decide what sketches in that room in Lorne's office, what sketches will be up that week. And then Wednesday night, they call the writer in, and the writer will follow his sketch. If you're picked, they pick about maybe 14 sketches,
Yeah.
And then you go around to the different departments and talk to them, and they start building sets right away. They start prepping, that night. And then Thursday, they're building sets and they're working on costumes and makeup and all that stuff, while the writers rewrite this 14 sketches, And there's not a lot of rewriting going on. It's mostly just a lot of sitting around goofing off, really. And then Friday comes up and they do a rehearsal. They just a walkthrough, they'll walk through the sketch,
Yeah. They'll
rehearse Friday. And then Saturday they just come in and they do the first, dress rehearsal, in front of a live audience. And then they take I think it's about maybe, 45 minutes or so that they have before the next show. They just get this audience out, bring the other one in, they shoot the live show. So it's pretty wild how they do that every week.
Yeah. So it's kind of like Lauren goes into a back room with the head writer and is like, okay, we're going to go with this guy. Were you nervous at all to having, like you mentioned, because, you hadn't really done much writing, compared to some of these guys who've been in there for, 10 years. Mm-hmm. Were you intimidated by that at all?
Not really. I was just more concerned about, it wasn't that I was nervous or afraid. It was just that I was really trying hard to write a good sketch, and I always felt like most of my sketches were a little offbeat and offbeat, but I always felt like they were too simple, maybe,
Yeah.
Well,
and how does that experience have you noticed like a change in maybe the quality of your writing under pressure, or has it been kind of the same sort of song and dance for you, whether there's a strict timeline like that or not?
I think I think that I think having a deadline, to really crank something out. I've had, like, when you're doing a rewrite for a movie, like 12 Days of Christmas I had I had only so much time. I had to rewrite the whole script. And so it's, you look at it and you go, man, how am I going to do this? How am I going to figure this out? Like there's a lot of work involved in trying to figure out, okay, how do I make this funny? How do I change this? What am I going to do? But inevitably you do it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't,
Were you able to collaborate with the other writers, or is it kind of like everybody sort of does their own thing?
Yeah, no, you can do anything you want. You collaborate with other people, you collaborate with performers, you would, or you'd maybe now and then, I'd usually have one that I worked on by myself, and then one that I would collaborate with someone else on it, either a performer or a writer. And I would collaborate with them on something, And did you meet your current book partner, Jerry? Was he in SNL as well, or where did you first interact with him? No, Jerry. I actually, while I was at SNL, the reason I left really is because I wanted to do things for myself, and so and the lifestyle on Saturday Night Live, you're working late nights and you're in New York, which doesn't really fit with my the way I like to live. And so
the surfing sort of lifestyle.
Yeah, waking up early, and it's so ingrained in me from my childhood too that it's hard for me to adjust that.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult for me. I'd just be exhausted at night. By 8:00 I wanted to go to bed, and these guys are just getting started.
Right.
And so while I was there, because I'd get there early in the morning, I wrote Strange Wilderness while I was there.
Oh, okay.
While I was at Saturday Night Live, I had done these shorts, for Comedy Central that Fred Wolf and I wrote, and these little shorts that I hosted, where I was the host of a wildlife show, and there were these little shorts. It was on Small Doses, an MTV or a Comedy Central show, and we did 6 of them, and so. So while I was at Saturday Night Live, I decided to write a movie using those shorts, and so when I finished the script, I took it back to LA and I did a rewrite on it with Fred Wolf. And then Fred went back to Saturday Night Live, and I tried to get the movie going. And so we ended up able to shoot the movie in I think it was 97. We shot the movie. And it was a low budget version of the movie that you saw, Strange Wilderness.
Right. I think I saw that one too. The one that has David Spade in it. And
yeah. Pat Sajak and
I think Sarah Silverman has a brief cameo.
Yeah, Sarah Silverman's in it. Yeah, and so it was great. I actually prefer that one to the big budget one. But if you've seen the big budget one and then you see the smaller low budget one, you probably prefer the bigger budget one.
What is it about the smaller budget one that you liked more? Was it that it was more controlled from like a comedic perspective, or
the biggest problem? And this is one but Happy Madison and Fred wanted it, but I didn't want them to be stoners. I wanted them to be just odd people. And so the original one, we were odd people who just made a lot of mistakes, you know?
Right.
And to me, that's funnier. Stoner comedies are great, but then everyone's a stoner, you know?
Right.
And it's like everyone has
kind of like a dead horse, or
you're making mistakes, or it's being goofy because you're stoned, rather than you're a character, you know? You're an odd character that just can't get it together, you know? Or that, you know. And so it's kind of like, really, when you look at a movie like Bottle Rocket, you know?
Yeah.
Is Bottle Rocket. They're odd guys, you know? And to me, that's way funnier than a stoner comedy. So once they did that, once we went the stoner route and did a rewrite, making everything stoner comedy.
Was that Adam's call, or whose call was that?
That was Happy Madison, and everybody at Happy Madison, because they had done Grandma's Boy, which is a stoner. Everyone's stoned, you know. Everyone's high, and so they wanted to repeat that kind of a template, that kind of a. They wanted to do that, you know.
Yeah.
And so I was bummed because I never really liked it then. I didn't like the finished product because of that, because the original would have. And Fred and I, you know, they said, well, look, why don't you guys we'll finance it and you guys can star in it like you did in the lower budget one. and we'll do it for like $2 million, or you can do it for like 7 or 8 million, and you guys could direct it and not star in it. We'll get somebody else to star in it. And so we went that route, thinking that we're too old to become actors, you know, which wasn't true. And you always think you're too old, but then you realize 10 years later that you weren't, you know.
And then you realize, I'm too old now.
Yeah, now I'm too old, you know. And then you realize 10 years after that, I'm not too old. It's like what Clint Eastwood said when he was 70, he was looking back, or when he was 60, he was looking back at when he was 50 and thinking, man, I wish I was 50. But then when he was 70, he remembers looking back at when he was 60 going, man, I wish I was 60. So you realize that, no, you just live for that day and don't think that you're too old to do anything, you know?
And if I recall, there was some issue with the DGA basically allowing 2 directors or something.
Yeah, we ended up, we were going to co-direct it, and then the Directors Guild would not let us co-direct. Now they would, but back then they wouldn't let us co-direct. So because of Fred's relationship with Happy Madison and Adam Sandler, they wanted him to direct it. So I literally went from, you know, I created the movie to I wanted to direct it and star in it, to where now I'm like a producer and a co-writer on the movie. You know, and it's a stoner movie that I don't really like. So you know, to me, it was a disaster, you know, but the first Strange Wilderness that I did do in like 97 or so, that was the most fun I've ever had doing anything. And that was mostly having to do with acting in the movie, you know. Yeah. It was more fun than I ever had doing anything, you know.
And how often have you had that experience in the feature film world where you've got the script, you know how you want it to look on screen, and somewhere along the way somebody says, hey, you know, it's got to change here, and it's no longer your film anymore, or at least it feels that in some way.
Every script. Yeah, there isn't one where it doesn't change in rewrites after you've done it, or the way that it's shot, you know. There isn't one movie that I've written that I thought, like when I wrote, Jerry and I, after I did Strange Wilderness, the low budget version, Jerry Swallow and I we wrote a movie called Mountain Fever. And it was like This was like in 1998 or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was like we wrote it really fast because I read Into Thin Air, about the Mount Everest expedition that goes really badly and people die on the mountain. It's a great book. It's unbelievable. The book's great. But both of us had the same reaction to the book. Is while we were reading the book, we couldn't stop laughing because there's such ridiculous stuff going on this mountain. Why people are even climbing this mountain, and they're like freezing to death, dying in storms.
Yeah, the people doing that are characters in and of themselves.
Yeah, and they're paying money to lots of money, and there's literally a person with an espresso machine being taken up the mountain and stuff. And so we decided to write a comedy about an expedition that goes awry, and it was hilarious, but I gave it to Fred Wolf to read, and he read 75 pages. And he said, this thing's really funny, but I just don't see it selling because it's just ridiculous. It was like an 80s comedy, like a Bill Murray comedy.
Yeah.
And so he said, I would maybe write something else. And so we literally, within about 2 months, wrote Say It Isn't So, which is awful title, but we wanted to call it The Pervert, or me and Peter Farrelly wanted to call it The Pervert. And but nobody would go for it, and that would have been the best title,
Right.
And so
why was it Say It Isn't So as opposed to Say It Ain't So?
Well, because I have no idea. I don't even know. I hated that title. I just go whatever, That was the first problem. The second one was that what Jerry and I wrote a really funny modern screwball comedy,
Yeah.
But then the Fairleys were so hot, and I do not blame them for this at all because I would have done the same thing, is they did something, they were coming off of Something About Mary. And after they had done Dumb and Dumber and Kingpin and then Something About Mary. And they had sort of a template of like this kind of shock comedy,
Yeah.
And they had this template for doing those set pieces, and having a lot, and they thinking that the heart of the movie is something you can just inject into any movie,
Yeah.
And so they did sort of with the director that we were working with, made like adjustments that Jerry and I were just, oh boy, we don't want to do this, but we had to do it. It was our first movie, it sold for $1 million, And so we were just new at this. So we were just making whatever adjustments they told us to make. And then the Farrelly brothers did a rewrite of it and changed a lot of stuff. And then by the time the movie was being made, we weren't really crazy about director choices and all that stuff. It was almost like you could look at everything that could possibly. We were able to watch everything that you could possibly do wrong with a movie. Right, and from the very beginning of selling a script, yay, great, hey, it's a great movie, everybody loves it, and then everybody starts to change it and tinker with it for like a year until we shoot it. And so it just became, from the title to all these different choices for whatever actors,
editor,
everything. It was all just, it was tough, and so. But it didn't help us in any way. Sure, we saw the things happen that we wish hadn't happened, and we had to just watch it and learn. But I don't know if if anything I learned helped me,
right
in the future. It was just something.
You learned what not to do at a minimum, right?
Yeah, I would rather have learned what to do to make a great movie, and this wasn't it. And so. Does
that just come with the territory as a writer then, just having to accept that, hey, I mean, you want to get into the feature game, you're going to have to deal with a certain amount of give and take to the point where maybe what you had set out to make is no longer recognizable? Well,
I had a chance to to write and direct my own thing, but I was staying sort of loyal to a different writing partnerships and stuff,
Yeah.
But that's really the only way to do it, is to be a writer director,
Yeah.
And that's probably what I had a couple shots at maybe doing that, and I didn't do it, and that was the biggest mistake. But finding out what you do wrong in each project that you do. It kind of it's a little bit, I hadn't really thought about it this way before, but like a relationship, when I have a relationship with a woman throughout the years, is you look at you try to figure out the woman and what went wrong and maybe not do that. Okay. But then with each person you meet, it presents a whole new set of problems that you've never seen before. And so all the stuff I learned from the last relationship didn't work with this one, Right. And so it's almost like you have to just stay true to yourself when you're working on something, whatever it is. Try to stay true to yourself as much as you can, and try not to hand it off to anybody until you absolutely have to, Finish whatever you do it quickly. Don't relax. You have to really if you have an idea for something, you can't just sit around and keep talking about it. You can't just write half of it or do a rough draft. And then you can't also just sit on it forever thinking that trying to pitch one project for like 10 years, which I see a lot of people do, They have their one script that this is a masterpiece. Why doesn't anybody want to do it? And I go, well, there's probably a reason, but just keep going, keep moving, I think that's probably the best thing that I have in my personality is that if something doesn't work out, I just sort of put my blinders on and just keep pushing forward, Sometimes I don't spend enough time pushing in the business side of it, taking what I have and trying to really get it to the right places. Yeah. I get impatient and I just want to work on the next thing because I have another idea and I want to work on it. And so I have like so many things that are complete. I have
a bin full of first acts too, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have first acts much anymore. I have
Really?
I have full outlines for movies, like 25-page outlines, and then I just sort of lose faith in it, and I don't want to write it because I'm not sure if it'll be good.
Do you get tired of something after you finished it? Like you put something away for a year, and then you go back and read it later, and you're like, oh God, like this is terrible. Or
I wonder sometimes there are a lot of outlines that I've written with writing partners also, where if I go look at them now, they just don't work,
Yeah.
And that's one thing that you do learn after doing it for a long time is you can look at a story or an idea and you go, it just doesn't. It's a great idea, but there's something missing and you can't figure it out,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the ending, the last act. You can't figure it out. And there are ideas that I have that are great ideas, great hooks and stuff, but I can't figure out how to end them, And what happens is usually if I don't come up with an ending, like usually I'll come up with a story that's completely first, second act, third act, all in one in like 5 minutes,
Yeah.
And though that's usually when something really works well is when it easily pops into your head. Oh, this is how you do it. This is great. It's a full movie, And when I have to work on the second half of the movie and I can't figure it out, I never am able to figure it out. And so I've learned to not spend too much time and not pine over something that I can't figure out. It's just forget about it. There are plenty of other ideas. And Jerry Swallow and I have a couple of things that actually we're working on one now, and then we're going to work on another one later. And these are based on stories that we've had for probably 12 years, and that we put the story together and then we abandoned them because we didn't quite have faith in them then, or we got busy with other things. But now we're working on one, which I think is a great idea. And eventually we're just fiddling with the story now, but we'll write it pretty quick, maybe in a couple of months. And I think it's really good. And so that's sometimes you look back and you see something that kind of, oh, that was actually a really good idea. Why didn't we do it? Why didn't we do this? And then you'll look closer and you'll go, oh, that's why we didn't do it. But with these two ideas, we looked back at them and we thought, these are actually really good. So we'll do them,
Yeah. One of the issues which has been talked about not only by you, but with some other writers that I've talked to, is the problem with script theft and also joke theft. How prevalent is that from the screenwriting side and from the stand-up side? Like, how often do people just rip stuff? Like, how often does a studio, do you think, like, if you could give a number, do you think it's fairly common? Was it more common in the 90s and maybe less so now? Like, what's your thought when it comes to like IP theft and stuff like that?
I've never what do you call it when you see, I don't even know the name for it, is when you
register it or register the script.
No, I've never registered a script in my life. Oh
man.
And so and a lot of people, they register everything,
Yeah.
And I've never registered anything in my life. And I've had about maybe three projects, maybe 2 films and a TV variety show that have been, obviously, because they were with these people that actually then ended up doing something just like it or very similar.
Yeah.
One huge movie, that was done. And that I know for sure, because the company that I pitched it to, like, 2.5 years before that, is the company that ended up doing it. And so, but to prove that is really tough if you're just pitching it out in a room to one guy, and then you forget about it because, that's the case of not following through. Like with the biggest one I did, that was a great idea. And Jerry and I should have written it right away. And then we would have had that idea, but we didn't. And then somebody else beat us to the punch. Even if it was our idea, they changed it enough and they made it better than we ever would have made it. But it changed it. And so,
and there's very little recourse as a writer too. I mean, reputation is everything. And do you really want to be the guy that's crying wolf about stolen scripts?
Well, yeah. And if the thing is, when I pitched that idea out, it was a second idea that I had. In the meeting, it was just we went in officially to pitch one thing, and everybody knew what it was, and they didn't want to do it. But then I pitched out this idea, just a back pocket pitch, where you sometimes just take something with you and you throw it out there, just, hey, well, how about this? And that's the one that was doing it. But there's no proof of that anywhere with agents or anybody, It's just something you pitched out fully, and then, hey, well, thanks, that was great, nice meeting you, and then you go away. And so
there's no NDAs or anything like that they sign, or like.
Well, no.
It's very informal.
Yeah. It's. I mean, if you go in and you're pitching an idea that your agents know that you're going in to pitch, and you actually have the copy of whatever it was you pitched, and then like 2 years later, that company does it, you have some recourse, because you have it. It's dated on your computer. You have the meeting that you went in for. Your agent is saying they pitched this, and so it's pretty easy to it's easier to follow, and I've had another movie that was obviously that Fred Wolf and I pitched, and that was also taken, but I don't know how that was actually, because I know the connection to who did, who the producer was. But anyway, the answer to your question is it happens, but I don't think it happens very often. And as far as stand-up comedy jokes being stolen, that's just part of the business in a way. It's like back in the old days, vaudeville acts and all the Vegas acts back in the 60s, and 70s, the older guys, these guys who like Joey Villa and all these old time comics, Shecky Green and stuff, they would ask the other comic that they all knew each other. They'd say, hey, you mind if I do that bit about the monkeys, having sex with your orangutan? And they would say, yeah, sure, go ahead. I want to use it next week. Okay. And they would just trade jokes because they're all either old jokes or but with comics stealing material, I don't think I think that comics might do that. Comics that maybe aren't great will do that on the road. Yeah. They'll borrow material just to, so that they can do better. I mean, it happened to me. It happened to friends of mine. Everybody's had jokes used by other people. And then you hear about it eventually. And then you call up the guy, and you say, hey, man, I heard you've been doing this thing. And they go, I'll kill you if you, if you kill anybody. Okay, all right, hey, easy. So it's just part of, it's part of what humans do, I guess. But it doesn't it happens, but I don't think it's a big problem,
Yeah.
I mean, Robin Williams used to lift material all the time because I doubt he wrote anything down, and he would watch comics or hear something, and it would just come out of him,
Yeah.
And I've known comics like that who do that. But the problem with Robin Williams is he would go do it on the Tonight Show or on Letterman, and then that bit becomes his because nobody can ever do it again. And so the comic who had the bit and it was his closer in his headline set, that's a big problem for that comic,
Yeah.
Because, now he's doing a Robin Williams routine. So that's why Robin Williams got thrown up against the wall at the Comedy Store now and then his manager had to pay off comics, who materially stole.
Yeah. So with some of these notable personalities that you've collaborated with, are there any that stick out to you as like, that was somebody I wish I could do another project with? I know you had somewhat of a relationship with Norm Macdonald, who's, I'm a big fan of his. Was there any comic that, maybe you wrote an episode for or something where you're like, yeah, that's the guy I'd like to include in a later project? They just get it.
Boy, it's been a while, since I think, now, I don't know. Now I think there are people who are probably like in their 30s that I've never worked with, that like Fred Wolf and I wrote a script and that we'd love to have like Anna Faris do,
Yeah.
And and then different people, like it's some of them are the older guys. It's like, there's a script that Fred and I wrote also that we're going to take out that we'd love to have, Sandler play the main role. And that's, you're trying to get the script to those people and at least maybe you have a shot at it,
Have you ever had any of those people like enact stuff that you've written, like Sandler or Farrell or any of the people that have starred in your films in the past? Like you've given them stuff and they act it out or anything interesting like that?
Well, we worked with, Sandler on Strange Wilderness.
Right.
And I mean, he wasn't in it, but we had a lot of people in it. And then with Drunk Parents, that was, a lot of people wanted to do that. And,
what was that experience working with Salma Hayek and Alec Baldwin on set?
It's funny because they aren't really comics,
Right.
And so, but they're actors and they have strong personalities. And Alec Baldwin's like amazing,
Yeah.
He's just incredible, I mean, he's so good, He's probably the most, I'd have to say he's probably the most, I guess, proficient actor. The most, he's just so good. He's just everything he says. Yeah, everything he says and does. If it's funny because he's just so that guy. It's just his line delivery, his line readings, and everything are just so good.
Was Will Ferrell also kind of that way with the jokes, or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Will's great. He just brings his own whole thing to it, and same thing with Norm, and they have their own sort of personality quirks that they throw into whatever they do, and it's always funny. You never get tired of it, really.
Yeah, no, yeah, I could imagine it'd be all jokes on set, unless the hours were pretty long and arduous, as are a lot of productions. Because I wonder also, having written a comedy, having to redo takes and spend a full day doing a couple scenes, like, do you get tired of just your own lines after a while, or?
No, not really. It's always, it's because there's a little bit of ad-libbing. There's a little bit of, trying to when something's on its feet, it's totally different than when it's on the page. And so it's always interesting,
Yeah.
to see something become something more when it's on its feet,
Yeah. Well, we're approaching about an hour now. I wanted to just finally ask you about sort of the broader state of comedy, whether it's features or television, because, the 90s, you had a lot of high concept movies, they called it. A guy finds a remote on the ground and, it gives him the power of God. And, it's a $40 million movie. But today, you don't see features kind of coming out like that anymore. So where do you see comedy headed to? Do you think it's going to get more digitized? Comedy is going to become more short form, in these like digital series, or where is it going?
I actually don't know. And I think what they need to do, but I don't know if they'll do it, is you can't, one of the problems, and I don't know if this is answering your question, but one of the problems with, matter of fact, this has nothing to do with your question, is when they're doing.
Well, let me rephrase the question. What is lacking in today's comedy? Maybe you can answer that.
Okay, that's better. Yeah, I think what's lacking are comedy stars, big comedy stars. Yep. Like you don't have the Will Ferrell's, Adam Sandler guys come popping out. Jim Carrey, and the reason I think is that you don't have, like, I don't think you can create big comedy stars on TV streaming. I think those have to be created in the theater setting on a big screen. And so I think that what I would do is, if I was, thinking about developing big comedy stars, is I would try to get these new up and coming people that you really believe in. The problem is a lot of these guys, a lot of them maybe aren't bigger than life, sort of like characters like those guys were, Jim Carrey and Will Ferrell, but trying to find that new generation sort of movie big stars, because you can't really open these comedies in theaters unless you have some big star in it, really, to get the people to come out. And to do that, though, you have to have them you have to put them in big movies. You have to put them on the big screen. And so if I were a studio, I would round up maybe three really, or a couple or somebody, a comic actor, and just try to create a big, you're going to have the first movie or whatever, like, Jim Carrey in Ace Ventura, or, Adam Sandler in Happy Gilmore, whatever he did. Jimmy Madison or or like Will Ferrell, and put them with other people so that you can create big. I think probably the last guys that were really created that way on a big screen were guys like Seth Rogen, and I think that that's what we need to get comedy back in movie theaters.
Do you think it's that like there's almost like too many smaller like comics on the internet and people that are popping up as like podcast personalities, but they just don't have that star power of
I think you need it's got to be people who are going to really be able to deliver that big star power, and I'm sure that's probably not going to happen, but I think that's what I would do if I was a studio. I would try to build comedy stars, and do it on the big screen.
It is really interesting because, when I look at clips from comedies that I used to enjoy and I read the comments, a lot of people are saying this was the last funny movie I ever saw come out. And there haven't been any funny movies since blah, 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 since this movie that came out in 2006 or whatever. And I think that is a real phenomenon that other people are recognizing, like, hey, like, what happened to these big kind of dumb, like, high concept films with these big A-listers that, we grew up on that we thought were funny? Like, it seems like they've been kind of cast away, and it's there's new formats that are trying to fill that need for comedy today. But I definitely get what you're saying. I don't think it's sufficient to draw back a lot of the people that were really enthralled with the earlier comedy stuff. So, yeah, I hope for that too. I do think that would be a wise choice on the part of the studio. But so to wrap this up, you have a book that's out now. It's Max Fernsby and the Infinite Toys. That's not the first book you've published, but it's your first children's book. Tell me a little bit about why you decided to go the route of a children's novel. Was it something kind of that you've had in the back of your mind for a while and you finally felt like it was the time to release it, or was it spur of the moment?
Well, it was kind of Jerry and I. It's a little not being satisfied with it's having more control over the content. It was perfect for a middle grade Christmas novel, but I think that by having what do they call it, the property, an IP property or whatever it is, having the original
rights.
property. The what?
The IP of the book, I guess.
Yeah. Is having the book and then being able to write the screenplay for it. It just gives you a little bit more control over what happens, and it's a better way to make money, because right now, it's really difficult to really make a living being a screenwriter. It's almost impossible.
You just had the strike, which went on for nearly a year, it felt like.
Yeah, well, the strike, and then also just residuals from the days before 2011 or so, with DVDs were great, but now there's nothing like a DVD or a VHS tape that can bring you residuals, unless you're doing a network TV show or something. And so it's really hard to bridge those gaps between screenplay sales. And, also another thing they stopped doing since like 2010 or 11, because of the economic crisis, is that they stopped doing development of scripts. Like you could go out and pitch a movie and then they would pay you to write the movie, and then they make the movie and then you get residuals from that,
Yeah.
But now they don't develop anything. What they want to see is a finished screenplay that is set up with an actor and maybe a director.
Package. They want a package.
Yeah, they want to see the whole package. And so that's really hard to do,
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do. So there's no more just going out. I used to be able to pitch ideas and then they'd have to say, okay, great, write it, and they'd pay you to write it. And you can make a good living, or just a decent living. But now it's impossible, really, to be honest. And I think it's impossible. Anybody who is wanting to get into the movie business, I would say probably not, I wouldn't probably do it. And
so how does the book business differ? What insights have you gleaned from that?
Well, the book business is actually worse. And so, if it can be worse, it's worse. I think of books as a hobby with potential.
Just get into plumbing or something, I guess. Just forget about
I would
all this.
say if there's something else you can do, I would probably do it. And so.
But the book business, though, what makes it worse than the script business?
There's so many. Everyone's writing a book, and also for you to make really any money with a book, you have to. They all have all these self-publishing things where they talk about people out there trying to sell your book. Here's how you do it. But the reality of it is you're going to take your book out, and if you sell let's say you sell 1,000 copies, you're going to make maybe $3,000. It's not gonna, that's just. It's silly, I mean, wow, I made money. It's really more for people who are writing as a hobby. 99% of the people writing as a hobby, and it's almost like being an artist.
Yeah,
you're going to do it, but you better have a backup. Not a backup, but actually a job.
or writing maybe to adapt later, which seems to be the route that you're taking with it, and a lot of other people.
Yeah, and that's not even. I mean, that's only if then that's a whole nother thing too, of trying to sell the rights to a book. That's very difficult. That's hard, and it's just it's I have I've done more. I have 2 of the Unseen America travel books.
Yeah,
I just finished the second one, and I just put it up on Amazon. but I don't make any money off of it. I think I make $1 if I sell one, and I'll sell maybe 100 of them. So I made $100. You know? So it's really more of a hobby. I do it because I like doing something where I can see it through to the end, and it's exactly what I want.
Yeah.
On those pages, and that's it. None
of this producer's cousin wants to change up your whole story type business.
I don't care if anybody likes it. It doesn't matter, you know? And it's nice to have an outlet like that. But is it going to be published? And even if it was published, would it make any money? Probably not, you know? And, but I do it anyway because it's something I can just do. I would say everybody go out and buy both copies of Unseen America because it's hilarious.
We will include links to all of this when it
it's
goes
hilarious.
Out, so.
But it's not gonna buy me a ticket to Hawaii.
It's not gonna put a dent in the housing cost. So
no, it's gonna pay. You know what it'll do? It'll pay my. What'll it do? Won't do much of anything, but it'll make me feel good
at a minimum.
It'll make me feel good to know that other people are looking at it, you know, and like to read it. And then go and put a comment on there, you know. Same thing with Max Fernsby. I think those are some of the better things I've ever done. I think that Unseen America is one of the best things I've ever done. Max Fernsby, it's one of the best things, you know. For those specific, you know, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, you know. But I drink coffee, so I don't care what, you know. I think that's an old saying. And so, I think the whole, I actually have 2 novels that are finished. One that I have to now go and find. This is how the book world works. Is my book agent said, he wanted to rep this book. But then when I sent him the next book, he looked at it and he said, he just didn't read it, just looked at the synopsis and he said, nah, you can go find another agent for that book. So it's like it's not like they have any loyalty to anything about what you're writing. They're just about cherry picking whatever, you know, and that's kind of disappointing. I didn't really expect that with book agents. And so I have 2 of the best things I've ever written, these 2 books. One's a sci-fi thriller kind of YA thing. The other one's a YA first of a trilogy, you know. I hope to one day write the rest, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But they're the best things I've ever written. And it's hard. I don't know how to go about, you know, I'm not a real, on the business end, I'm not very good. And so for me to go out, okay, I got to hustle up another agent and then try to then go, if I can find an agent that will want to represent that book, is then you got to go find a publisher, you know. And then when the book gets printed, like Max Fernsby, HarperCollins they didn't do any promotion for it, and so, you know, it could have been self-published. So it's always there's that.
Well, but you get the in-store kind of distribution channels, right? You get Barnes and
no, they wouldn't put it in Barnes and Noble because
really
it's not cost effective because they have to pay, I guess, so much, and the internet is where they really try. But all they did with the internet is they sent it out to people to read and then promote it or recommend it to people who read their blogs and stuff. So, you know, it almost has to find its own way. They aren't going to help it get there, you know?
Wow. Huh. Well, that's a little disappointing on their part.
We were very disappointed in that they really didn't do much of anything. I don't know what'll happen with it, but I think it's like a great classic Christmas story that I don't really see much of out there, you know?
Yeah.
And I would promote it like crazy.
We'll definitely have to give it the shout and put some links down below once this drops. I'm going to be filming a couple more episodes before the podcast gets rolling, but you were my number 1 guest appearance, so I figure with this we can maybe drive a few more sales over to you. But Pete, thanks so much.
Well, Aaron, it was nice talking to you, and this is the most I've talked to you since maybe a year ago. And so if this is how I need to get together with you to talk to you, then I'll do this again.
Yeah, well, we can definitely catch up more on a call or something after this.
Yeah.
It's been a little hectic with the move and everything, just getting situated.
Yeah.
I slept here for the first week without any furniture. I was just on the floor, and that was a whole another experience, just because my furniture got delayed. Long story, but now that I'm fully here and we're building a studio right now to accommodate like in-person guests and things, I'm really excited to see where it's going to go. But yeah, thanks for being a part of that, and wishing
good
you
luck.
the
I'll
best
talk
with
to you
the
soon.
books. Yeah, take care, Pete.
All right, Darren.
See
you around.